Representative Lindbergh is saying when the president signs this Federal Reserve Act, the invisible government, he's saying, proven to exist by the Monetary and Trust investigation, will be legalized. The new law will create inflation whenever the trusts want inflation. From now on, depressions will be scientifically created. So according to this idea that we've had from several presidents, in fact, all the way back to Jefferson, a consistent idea that who controls the money supply will be manufacturing depressions, recessions, inflationary cycles, boom and bust cycles, crisis in the market. They're all manufactured. This isn't my thinking. This is a consistent line now between Jefferson and, as we'll see, Woodrow Wilson, consistently saying that's how they rule, creating inflation, depression, unemployment. And it's so funny, around this time we have two thinkers about the media, Walter Lippmann and Edward Bernays, that are also going to use this word, invisible government. They not only manipulate the money supply in order to create monopolies, to create greater rule, but through these monopolies shape perceptions. Bernays would say, in effect, that the people, the citizens, imagine that all of their tastes and preferences and likes and dislikes are their own, and they're not. They're a product of this invisible government. Their words, these presidents' words, these representatives' words, not mine. So they're talking about the invisible force, the deep state, through usury, through creating monopolies, through shaping perceptions, they rule. Lindbergh would continue by stating how essentially the president had sold the country out. That's the president, Woodrow Wilson. And of course, he, upon reflection in 1919, would say, "I am the most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country." He sees that there's going to be a period of essentially deindustrialization. Income taxes are going to take more and more of individuals' money, i.e. their freedom, decade by decade. He saw that coming. He sold the country out. He admitted to it. The great industrialized nation is now controlled by its system of credit. We are no longer a government by free opinion, no longer a government by conviction, the vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men. He said that in 1919. Okay, so let's reflect on that during all of our cycles of inflation, deflation, recession, and unemployment. He's saying that these are manufactured events because we have given over, this was 100 years ago, given over our freedom. He says, I have, to a great, strong, independent people, an industrialized nation. He also says that, this is Woodrow Wilson, since I've been in politics, I have noticed privately that behind the scenes in the United States, it's controlled by this cadre of bankers and manufacturers, the power of which is so subtle and so passive that nobody dares speak but under their breath about it. So again, we're talking about a deep state. It didn't necessarily even infiltrate the country. I have argued before that it was there before the Constitution. It helped to create the country. It's a dual government. It uses democracy, that is democracy, that the Republican form of government no longer protected itself. We get a two-party system, we get democracy. That's how it operates. That's how Plato said it functions when it degenerates. It's the government behind the government, the dual government. Let's go over a couple other quotes by people of note. One that I have here is from 1844. So we're jumping back sort of between Jackson's time and Lincoln's time. This is from the Prime Minister of England, or the British Empire. He's going to say, quote unquote, "The world is governed by very different personages from what is imagined by those who are not behind the scenes." Again, in isolation, not much. Let's put together a pattern. So he goes, we got the visible, and then we got the real power. The real rulers in Washington are invisible and exercise power from behind the scenes. Felix Frankfurter, U.S. Supreme Court. He's saying this right about the same time Wilson's saying it, the invisible government. Who else would speak of the invisible government? Two of the fathers of public opinion and media, Walter Lippmann and Edward Bernays, would say at the same time period, the 1920s and the 1930s, Bernays in particular would say people imagine their preferences, their tastes, their notion of liberty and rights are their own, but they're not. They've been shaped from men behind the scenes. For the real rulers of power in Washington is the invisible government. Was he just shooting the shite? Well, he was the one that actually helped sell the idea of the Federal Reserve. He helped sell the idea of World War I, just as he had sold the idea of consuming bacon and smoking cigarettes. He knew the actual methods to sell something so that we could sort of have a dual-mindedness about it, a sort of scientific media to take Plato's images on the cave walls to the next level so that we can see and not see. And he explains much of this in his idea about media, and as well Lippmann would be in this notion of how to shape public opinion. Here's one from John F. Harlan. He's the mayor of New York in 1922, right about the same period. The real menace of our republic is the invisible government. I'm just reading the invisible government, the deep state. This didn't come about with Donald Trump, which, like a giant octopus, sprawls its slimy length over the city, the state, and the nation. At the head is a small group of banking houses, generally referred to as international bankers. So he's using the same metaphor Jackson did, you vipers, and we'll see Jackson way back in the 1830s in the cartoons of his era, that sort of hydra serpent, the many-headed serpent, that all came back to the trunk, the money supply, that had its corporations, that had its influence in Washington, that was inserting its own desires into the states and the cities of the entire body politics. At the head is this small group of houses, generally referred to as international bankers. This little cadre of powerful international bankers virtually run our government for their own selfish ends. So he's not saying they totally run it. This is 1922. They, there's a little play here and there where the democratic process exists. That's how the oligarchs like it. Just enough so you can see some connection between the desires of the people and some outcome at the state or federal level. Just enough to make it believable. This is by the other Roosevelt, Franklin Delano, in 1933. The real truth of the matter is, as you and I know, that a financial element in large centers has owned the government ever since the days of Andrew Jackson. So, is he saying Jackson killed the bank? No, he's not saying Jackson killed the